Please leave a comment where you are watching from. It was the Halloween before everything changed. I was 15, living in Mesa, Arizona, just a few blocks from the edge of the Salt River Pima Maricopa Reservation. It was one of those warm, dry nights where the wind smells like dust and mesquite smoke, and the air hums with something you can't quite name. My best friend Sammy had come over to trick or treat, even though we were probably too old for it. But we didn't care. We weren't really in it for the candy anymore. It was more about the thrill of walking the dark streets, the costumes, the night itself. Halloween always felt different in our neighborhood, like the veil between worlds really did get thinner. My grandfather, Popa Joe, always told me to be careful on Halloween night. There are things that listen harder when the moon is thin, he said. Things that remember your name. He wasn't trying to scare me. He just wanted me to be aware. He was a medicine man, respected, gentle, and not someone who wasted words. When he spoke, you listened. That night, I wore a spirit mask he'd made for me a few years earlier. It was carved from cottonwood, with delicate paintwork and a braid of dried sweetgrass tied at the top. It didn't look like any costume you'd find in a store. When I was younger, I thought it was weird. But that year, I put it on without a second thought. It felt right. Sammy came as a vampire, complete with plastic fangs and a cape from Spirit Halloween. We left the house just after 7 o'clock, walking the usual route, up through the subdivision, past the older houses with the chilly lights, then looping around toward the edge of the desert reserve. Fewer kids went that way, but we liked it. It was quieter, and the houses near the canyon drop had the best candy. We were halfway down a stretch of road lined with Palo Verde trees when we saw it. At first, I thought it was a big dog. It was standing in the middle of the asphalt, maybe 20 feet ahead. Its fur was dark and bristled, and it was hunched low to the ground. The streetlight above flickered once, then held steady. Sammy whispered, "Is that a coyote?" I shook my head. It was too big, too still. We stopped. The creature turned its head toward us. Its eyes were yellow, not reflective like an animal's, but sharp and aware. Its body shifted slightly, and I realized its limbs were longer than they should have been. Its front legs dragged, slightly bent. Its back legs were bunched, like it was ready to spring. And then slowly it stood up. Not all the way. Not like a person, but enough. Its spine cracked. Its shoulders rolled back, and it began to move toward us. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough to say, "I see you." Sammy grabbed my arm. "Lila." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Then I remembered the mask. I reached up, adjusted it so it sat properly on my face, and whispered my grandfather's words. "Walk like you are not afraid. Speak like you are not prey." The thing stopped. It cocked its head. Then it took one more step. I stepped forward. Sammy tried to hold me back, but I shrugged her off. My heart was hammering, but I felt something else too. A calm. A voice in my chest that wasn't mine. "Go home," I said. My voice was steady. "You are not welcome here." The creature paused. Its lips peeled back, not in a snarl, but in something like a grimace. Its eyes narrowed, and then it turned. Not quickly, not like it was afraid, but like it had been acknowledged. It walked off the road and disappeared into the wash, its limbs shifting back into something more animal than human. The street lamp above us flickered again. Then silence. We didn't say much on the way home. Sammy was pale and jumpy, clutching her candy bag like a talisman. When we got to my house, I took off the mask and kissed it, the way Popa Joe had taught me. Then I placed it on the altar shelf by the fireplace. He was waiting in his chair. He didn't say hello, or "Where have you been?" He just looked at me, then at the mask. "What did it do?" he asked. "Watched," I said. "Came close, but not too close." He nodded. "You did good. You remembered." Sammy sat on the couch, staring at him. What even was that?" Popa Joe turned to her. "Some call them skinwalkers, but those are dying words. This one was different. Older. A watcher. It tests the bold, but it leaves the strong." Sammy didn't say anything. After a while, she got up and went home. The next morning, I found a line of small stones on our front porch. 7 rocks. Smooth. Placed carefully. Popa Joe saw them and nodded. "It gave a gift," he said, "for being seen." We left the stones where they were. I never saw it again, but I still wear the mask every Halloween. Not for candy, not for tradition, but for respect, because there are spirits that walk between the houses on that night. Some are lost, some are curious, and some are looking for someone to test. But if you face them with the right words, the right heart, sometimes they just pass by, and sometimes they leave gifts. We rented the cottage for a week in early autumn, hoping for a quiet escape. James and I had both been worn thin, me from long hours at the hospital, him from finishing up a manuscript that had consumed most of the summer. The idea was to rest, walk a little, cook our own meals, read by the fire. No Wi-Fi, no phone signal, just the hills, the mist, and the quiet. Brantfell Cottage sat just outside Windermere, tucked behind a dry stone wall on a narrow lane that curled up into the fells. It was an old place, maybe 180 years, based on the frosted glass above the oak door and the slant of the upstairs ceiling. The listing had described it as historic and charmingly crooked, which turned out to mean that nothing in the house sat quite where you'd expect. The kitchen sloped slightly to the left. The stairs creaked even when you weren't on them. And the bedroom, especially the bedroom, had something about it I didn't like. But I didn't say anything at first. We were there to relax. The first 2 days passed in a blur of tea, rain, and long walks through the bracken. We cooked simple dinners, played cards, and listened to the wind press against the windows. James joked that we should buy a place like it someday, tuck ourselves into the hillside, and disappear from the world. I laughed, but the bedroom still felt wrong. It was the attic door. It was a narrow panel set into the sloped ceiling above the bed, one of those low crawl spaces you only ever see in old houses. The edges were finger-smudged, as if someone had opened it more than once in the last few months, though the listing said the attic was sealed and used only for insulation. On the second night, I woke up to the sound of scratching, just a few faint scrapes, like a nail on wood. I opened my eyes. James was asleep beside me, mouth slightly open, breathing slow and deep. The scratching came again. This time I sat up. It was coming from above us, from the attic. I stared at the hatch. It didn't move. It didn't shake. But I knew what I'd heard. I waited another minute, maybe 2, then got back under the covers. Told myself it was a squirrel on the roof. A pine marten. Something ordinary. But I didn't sleep. The next morning, I asked James if he'd heard anything. No, he said, pouring cereal. Like what? I don't know. A noise on the roof, maybe. He shrugged. It's an old house. Probably mice. Probably. That afternoon, we walked the trail up to Orist Head. The view was misted over, but we sat for a while anyway, watching the silver gleam of the lake through the trees. On the way back, it started to rain. Cold, hard drops that turned the path slick and treacherous. We got home soaked through, laughing breathless. Dinner that night was pasta and red wine. We watched the fire and listened to the wind again, and for a while, I forgot about the attic. Until the second night. Just after 2 a.m., I woke again. This time it wasn't scratching. It was footsteps. Deliberate. Slow. Gravel on slate. They moved across the roof, light, but heavy enough to hear clearly, and then stopped above our bedroom. Then came the scratching. Not faint this time. Louder. More insistent. I sat up again. The attic door was still closed. But I was certain the noise wasn't on the roof itself. It was coming from inside the crawl space. James stirred beside me. What is it? You don't hear that? He paused. Listened. Then, no. You're dreaming, love. He turned over and pulled the blanket up. The scratching stopped. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. By the 4th day, I was jumpy. I kept checking corners, listening too hard when the wind hit the eaves. James noticed and teased me gently, asking if I'd read too many ghost stories as a kid. I didn't mention that I hadn't read them. I'd lived through one. When I was 8, my mother had rented a house in Cornwall with a similar attic door. I remembered lying awake at night, listening to something move above us. She told me it was birds. But the birds had never opened the hatch. One morning, we'd found it ajar. Just a crack. Enough to see the darkness beyond. It had stayed closed after that. But she never explained it. Never mentioned it again. At Brantfell, I started checking the attic door every time we entered the bedroom. It was always shut. Until the 5th night. It had been a good day. Clear skies. We took a boat out on the lake and ate lunch in Ambleside. I felt more like myself than I had in weeks. That night, we lit candles, played records, and stayed up late talking. But sometime after midnight, I woke again. It was colder than usual. The fire had long since gone out, but the chill felt deeper than that, like the heat had been pulled from the room. I rolled over. And stopped. The attic door was open. Just a few inches. Enough to see the black between the boards. Enough to know it hadn't been opened before. I stared at it, heart hammering. Then I nudged James. He groaned. "What? Look." He sat up, blinking. "What the hell?" he muttered. He got up, dragged the chair from the corner, and stepped on it to push the door shut. It closed with a soft thunk. He climbed down and looked at me. "It's old wood," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe it slipped. Doors don't slip open in the middle of the night." He didn't answer. We didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, we called the property manager. She was polite but skeptical. "No one's been in the attic in years," she said. "It's just insulation up there. Nothing else. But I can send someone to check it if you're concerned." We said no. We were leaving in 2 days anyway. That night, we slept downstairs on the sofa bed. Our final night was quiet at first. The wind picked up again, whistling through the chimney. We played cards, packed most of our things, and left the bedroom door closed. We went to bed around 11:30. At 3:12 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps on the roof again. Then scratching. Then tapping. Not above us, but above the bedroom, where the attic door was. We lay there in silence. Then James whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded. We didn't move. The sound went on for several minutes. Then stopped. I don't know how long we stayed like that, staring up at the ceiling with our breaths held. Eventually, James got up, went to the kitchen, and returned with the iron fireplace poker. He didn't say anything, just held it in his hand until dawn. In the morning, we went upstairs. The attic door was open again, wider this time. The air beneath it was cold and sour, like old wood and damp stone. I stood beneath it, staring up into the black. I don't know what I expected to see, but I didn't expect the small pile of gravel on the floorboards beneath it. 6 stones. Rough. Gray. The kind you find on a slate roof. We hadn't brought them in. We hadn't touched the attic. James closed the hatch one last time, and we packed the car without speaking. We didn't say goodbye to the house. We didn't look back. Weeks later, James brought it up again. We were back in the city, back to work, back to noise and traffic, and everything we'd taken a break from. He said, "You know what scared me the most?" I shook my head. "It wasn't the door being open," he said. "It was the gravel." "Why?" "Because I think it wanted us to know it had been outside." I didn't answer. Because I'd been thinking the same thing. It happened the first week we moved to the farmhouse. We'd been living in Eugene for most of my daughter's life, but after a rough divorce and too many months of city noise grinding my nerves, I decided we needed a change. Something slower, cleaner. A place where Mara could run barefoot, without stepping on broken glass or cigarette butts. So I found a rental just outside of the Willamette Valley, tucked between small, sloping hills and pine woods that looked like they hadn't changed in decades. The house was old but charming. 2 stories, a wraparound porch, and enough creaks in the floorboards to give it personality. My Aunt Sophia lived about 10 minutes away, just across the ridge, and she was the one who helped us move in. The first night was uneventful. Some wind, some raccoons in the trash cans. We had pizza on the living room floor, and listened to frogs croaking in the ditch behind the barn. Mara was already in love with the place. I was exhausted but hopeful. The second night was when things changed. It was just after 8:30 p.m., and I was driving up the gravel road that led to our house. Mara was in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket, watching the dark blur past the window. Aunt Sophia had invited us over for dinner, roast chicken and baked squash, and we were both full and sleepy. The radio was off. Everything was quiet. That's when we saw it. At the top of the hill, just before our driveway curves to the right, something was standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a dog. It was shaggy, low to the ground, and unmoving. But as we got closer, I realized something was off. It was too still, too symmetrical. Its fur, if you could call it that, was patchy, like it had been scraped off in places. The skin underneath was gray, almost blue in the headlights. Its limbs were long and thin, but I couldn't see paws. Just extensions, like the ends had fingers, or something close to them. Its head was tilted slightly, the way a curious animal might look at you, except it didn't blink. It didn't flinch, and its mouth was open. Not panting, not snarling, just open. Wide. Too wide. "Mum," Mara said softly. "What is that?" I slowed the car. The thing didn't move. We were maybe 30 feet away when I realized it had eyes. Pale yellow. Not glowing, exactly, but reflecting the headlights in a way that made them look like they were lit from inside. It was smiling. Not in a human way. Not like something happy. It was the kind of smile that looked painted on. Fixed. As if the skin had been stretched to show its teeth, and then left that way. I stopped the car completely. Mara was sitting perfectly still. I could see her fingers clutching the blanket, knuckles white. The thing took a step forward. Not a lunge. Not aggressive. Just one step. That's when I heard the tire crunch behind us. Aunt Sophia's car. She'd left just before us, taken the long way around to avoid the gravel. Her headlights came over the hill, bright and sudden, and in that instant the thing turned. Not like an animal. Not like a person. It twisted. Its whole body rotated, spine bending in a way that didn't make sense, and then it bolted off the road into the trees, silent and fast. By the time Sophia pulled up beside us, it was gone. She rolled down her window. "You okay?" I didn't know what to say. Just nodded. "Dear?" she asked. "No," Mara whispered. Sophia looked at her, then at me. "You saw it too?" "Yeah," I said. "It wasn't a deer. We didn't talk about it that night." I put Mara to bed and sat on the porch for a long time, staring at the tree line. Listening. Nothing moved. The next morning, I checked the road. No tracks. No fur. Just a few bent blades of grass where it had stepped off the edge. I didn't mention it to Mara. I didn't want to scare her. But that afternoon, she drew something on her sketch pad. It was the thing. She didn't label it. Didn't color it in. Just a pencil outline, staring straight ahead with its too wide mouth and stick-like limbs. I asked her why she drew it. She shrugged. "It was looking at us," she said. Weeks passed. Nothing else happened. I started to think maybe we'd imagined it, that the headlights and shadows had made something ordinary look terrifying. Then I ran into our neighbor, Mr. Harlan. He was in his 60s, lived alone in a house farther up the ridge. A quiet man, polite, with a heavy Oregon accent and skin like tanned leather. We were talking about fencing. Something had knocked over the bottom rail near the orchard. When I mentioned strange animals. Just in passing. He stopped. "What kind of strange?" he asked. I hesitated, then said, "We saw something on the road. Looked like a dog, but wrong. Too tall." It smiled. He went quiet. Then he said, "Don't stop for them." I blinked. "What?" "If you see one again," he said, "don't stop. Keep driving. Even if it's in the middle of the road. It'll move. Don't make eye contact. Don't slow down. And don't ever talk to it." He didn't say anything else. Just turned and walked back to his truck. I never told Mara what he said. But every time I drive that road now, I keep my eyes locked straight ahead. And I keep a bag of salt under the seat. Just in case. People don't talk about the valley anymore. Some of the old ones still know its name, but they won't say it out loud. Not even during ceremony. Not even when they're alone. They say things like "that place" or "where the wind turns backwards." And if someone younger presses too hard, they just shake their heads and say, "Leave it alone. It's not for you." I didn't listen. I was 17 when I went into the valley. I'm 68 now, and I still wake up some nights feeling the cold breath of it on my back. I'll tell you what happened, but only because I think someone should know what's really out there. Someone who won't laugh, who won't chalk it up to hallucinations or superstition. But I'll start at the beginning, before I went in. I grew up near the Arizona-New Mexico border, a wide stretch of mesas, canyons, and pine-covered hills. Beautiful country. Sacred, too. My grandfather was a medicine man, a respected one. People came from 3 communities over to ask for his help, healing dreams, tracking lost things. He raised me after my parents passed, taught me to listen, to watch, to respect the land, and to fear what couldn't be named. The valley, I won't say what we called it, is a place hidden between 2 ridges of red stone. There's no official trail, no markers. But if you know the shape of the land, you can find it. It's tucked into a fold of canyon where the wind doesn't blow right and birds don't fly overhead. Grandfather used to say, "The land bends there. What walks in is not always what walks out." We all knew the stories. Skinwalkers, shape stealers, the ones who used to be people but gave up their humanity for power. They say they wear the skins of what they kill. Coyotes, owls, even people. That they can mimic your voice, your scent, your walk. They say they live in that valley. I didn't believe it. I was 17. Arrogant. I'd been accepted into college in Flagstaff and thought I knew everything. Thought the stories were just tales to keep kids from wandering off. So one night, I told my friend Manny I was going to prove it was all garbage. "I'm going into the valley," I said. "I'll bring back a rock or something. Maybe a rabbit skull." just to show everyone it's nothing. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. "Don't be stupid," he said. "That place isn't ours. It's theirs." But I didn't listen. That night, I packed a flashlight, my grandfather's old knife, and a flask of water. I didn't tell him I was going. Just left a note saying I'd be back by sunrise. It was a 2-hour hike through rough terrain. The moon was out, but the clouds moved fast, like they were trying to cover it. I used the ridgeline as my guide, and found the valley just after midnight. The entrance was a narrow cut between two boulders. When I stepped through, the air changed. It got colder, heavier, like walking underwater. I remember stopping and thinking, this feels wrong. But I kept going. The valley floor was flat, covered in dry grass and scattered stones. The walls on either side rose high and smooth, red rock streaked with mineral veins. No plants grew along the base. No insects. Just silence. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, looking for something unusual, something to take back, when I heard it. Elijah. It was my grandmother's voice. She'd been dead for 3 years. "Elijah, come here, baby." I froze. The voice came from up ahead, beyond a cluster of rocks. "Elijah, it's me." She sounded calm, loving. I took a step forward. Then I remembered something my grandfather once said. "It will sound like someone you love. That's how it gets close." I turned off my flashlight, sat down behind a rock. I waited. After a minute, I heard footsteps. Light. Careful. Then I heard her voice again, closer. "Elijah, please. It's cold. I need your help." It was perfect. The cadence, the rhythm, even the way she used to say my name. I didn't move. The voice kept calling. Then it changed. "Elijah." It said again, but this time wrong. The tone flattened. The pitch wavered, like a tape recording slowing down. Then I heard another voice. My own. "Elijah. Elijah. Elijah." Repeating. Layered. Like an echo chamber made of me. I pressed my back against the rock and closed my eyes. Then the smell hit me, wet fur and rot. Like a dead animal left in the sun too long. I opened my eyes just enough to see something moving through the rocks. It was tall, thin, covered in what looked like deer hide that had rotted in patches. Its limbs were too long. Its knees bent the wrong way. Its face, I don't know what to call it. It didn't have eyes, just holes, and a mouth that opened sideways. It paused, turned its head toward me. I didn't breathe. Then it screamed. Not like a human scream. Not like any animal I've ever heard. It was a sound that ripped through my chest and made my teeth ache. I clutched my ears and dropped to the ground. When I looked up, it was gone. I didn't wait. I ran. I don't remember the path back. Just trees and rocks flashing past, my heart pounding, my feet slipping. I fell at least twice. Tore my leg open on something sharp. But I didn't stop. Didn't stop until I burst out of the valley and collapsed on the ridge. The air was warm again. The stars were visible. I lay there until sunrise. When I got home, my grandfather was waiting. He didn't ask where I'd been. Just brought me inside, sat me down, and started a smoke blessing. He didn't speak until the sun was fully up. Then he said, "You're lucky, but you brought something back." And he was right. For weeks, maybe months, I felt it. Every time I passed a mirror, I'd catch something just behind me. Every night, I'd hear whispers outside my window, soft like wind through dead grass. Eventually they faded, but the scar on my leg never did. Still itches when the weather turns. Still throbs when I think too hard about that night. I've never gone back. No one has. And we don't say the valley's name. Not anymore. When I was 16, I lived in a town so small it barely made the map. Upper Ballynaw, out in the bushland of inland Queensland. Dirt roads, eucalyptus trees, and the kind of heat that made the bitumen stick to your shoes. I lived with my mum and older brother in a weatherboard house on the edge of town. Back then, my best mate was a kid named Jory. He lived 2 paddocks over, and most afternoons we'd ride bikes to each other's places, eat cold Milo straight from the tin, and talk about music, girls, and how bored we were. It was the kind of town where nothing happened. Not really. The kind of place where you could go your whole life and never see anything stranger than a blue-tongued lizard on the veranda or a wedge-tailed eagle swooping down for a rabbit. That's what made what we saw that night so unforgettable. It was late October, about a week before the school year ended. The days were long, the nights warm, and the air smelled like dry grass and wood smoke. Jory and I had been at his place, mucking around with his dad's old shortwave radio, trying to pick up weird stations. We lost track of time, and by the time I looked up, it was nearly 9:30. "Crap," I said. "Mum's gonna kill me." "Take the back road," Jory said. "It's quicker." He meant the fire trail that ran behind the school grounds and wound its way between a row of old cattle properties before coming out near the water tower behind my place. It shaved 5 minutes off the ride, and we'd taken it dozens of times before, though never that late. I threw my backpack over my shoulder, clipped my torch to the handlebars, and pedaled off into the night. The fire trail was cool and quiet, the kind of dark that only happens when you're far from streetlights. I could hear the gravel crunching under my tires, the occasional chirp of a frog, and the distant hum of insects. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. I just passed the turnoff near the fallen gum tree when I noticed something ahead. 2 shapes, low to the ground, moving fast. At first, I thought they were dingoes, but they were too big, too sleek. Their limbs were long and whip-like, their heads narrow and snouty. They moved like greyhounds, tightly wound, all muscle and speed. They were running across the trail maybe 20 meters ahead of me, heading from one side of the bush to the other. Then one of them stopped. Not all the way, just slowed enough to look over its shoulder. That's when I saw its eyes. They glinted yellow in my torch beam. Not reflective like an animal's, but glowing. Like embers. The other one skidded to a halt beside it. They both turned, facing me from the edge of the trees. And then they started to change. I didn't believe it at first. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. But they began to rise slowly, unnaturally, as if pulled upright by invisible strings. Their front limbs stretched, cracking at the joints. Their spines straightened, and their shoulders rolled back. They grew taller, broader. Their greyhound-like frames twisted into something else entirely. Something that stood on 2 legs. They weren't dogs anymore. They were bigger. Wrong. Covered in short, dark fur, with long arms that hung nearly to their knees. Their chests were barrel-like, their legs thick and sinewy. Their heads still held that doggish shape, elongated muzzles, pointed ears, but their jaws opened wider than they should have. Much wider. I dropped my bike. Didn't even think about it, just turned and ran back the way I'd come. I didn't scream. Couldn't. My breath was caught somewhere between my chest and throat. I ran so hard my legs burned, my shoes skidded on the gravel, and I nearly tripped twice. My torch bounced in my hand, throwing wild beams of light across the trees. Behind me, I heard them move. Not running, just stepping. One step, then another. Deliberate, measured. They weren't chasing me. They were following. I burst out of the trail and back onto Jory's street, heart hammering so hard I thought I might throw up. Jory was still outside, sitting on the porch, fiddling with the radio antenna. He looked up when he saw me. "Mate, what the hell?" "They're out there," I gasped. There's something out there." I must have looked like I'd seen death itself, because he didn't laugh. Just got up and followed me inside, locking the door behind us. We didn't sleep that night. The next day we went back, just after sunrise. We walked the trail together, sticks in hand, eyes scanning every shadow. No sign of them. No tracks. No fur. Just a few broken branches near where I'd seen them. I started to doubt myself. Maybe it was the dark. Maybe my torch had glared off something and made it seem worse than it was. Then we found the rock. It was a flat stone, maybe the size of a dinner plate, sitting right in the center of the trail. Fresh claw marks scored across the top. 5 deep gouges that cut through the lichen and into the stone itself. No dog did that. We left it alone. Didn't take pictures. Didn't bring it up again for weeks. And then something else happened. A few weeks later, Jory's brother was driving home from work just after midnight. He took the same road I had, and when he got home, he looked pale and shaken. He told Jory he'd seen something on the side of the road. 2 figures. Tall. Covered in dark fur. Just standing there, watching his Uda go by. He said they didn't flinch at the headlights. Didn't move. Just stared. When Jory told me that, I felt sick. It wasn't just me. Someone else had seen them. We started doing research. Yowies. That's what people call them out here. Australia's version of Bigfoot. But most of the stories talk about shaggy ape men in the rainforest or deep bush, not slinking greyhound things that turn into monsters. We couldn't find anything that matched. Then Jory's uncle, who'd spent most of his life working on cattle stations out west, pulled us aside one day. Said he overheard us talking. "You boys ever hear of the running ones?" he asked. We shook our heads. "They're not yowies," he said. "They're older. Meaner. People used to say they'd run alongside riders at night, just out of reach, whispering. Sometimes they'd look like dogs, other times not. He wouldn't say more, just told us to stay off the trail after sundown. We listened. I haven't seen them again. Not exactly. But sometimes, when I'm driving late down those old roads, I catch movement in the trees, low and fast, and I swear I can feel something watching me. I don't take the fire trail anymore, and I don't ride my bike at night. Whatever those things were, they weren't dogs. They were waiting, and they still are. I live on the Waziquan First Nation land, about 3 hours north of the Pas, Manitoba. It's a scattered community, some parts thick with spruce and birch, others open and flat like the land's holding its breath. We don't get much traffic outside of kin and the occasional government pickup. It's quiet most of the time, except for snowmobiles in winter or dogs barking at night. I've lived on this land my whole life, 52 years come October. I raise cattle. Not many, just enough to get by. Small herds. Tough animals. We've got good pasture in the summer and hay to get us through the winter. My cows don't spook easy. They're used to the smell of coyotes, the sound of kids hollering, the sudden clap of thunder. Which is why when I heard them panic that night, I knew something was wrong. It was the tail end of January. The wind had been dead for a few days, which around here is strange. Usually, there's always a soft hiss through the trees. That night was still. Too still. The kind of quiet that presses into your ears, makes your breath feel too loud. I was sitting inside, just me and the radio, when I heard it. A low, guttural bellow from one of my cows. Then another. Then several, all at once, overlapping until it sounded like a panic stampede. I jumped up, grabbed my coat and boots, and took the old shotgun down from the hooks by the door. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. Maybe a bear that hadn't fully gone down for winter. But I loaded the gun anyway. The snow in the yard was packed down pretty good, but past the fence it was deep. I had to push through drifts up to my knees, the crunch of each step loud in the silence. The moon was high, full, casting cold blue light over the pasture. I didn't need a flashlight. Everything looked silver. I reached the fence line and paused. The cows were gathered on the far side of the field, bunched up, facing the woods. Their breath came out in great streaming clouds, and they didn't so much as flick their ears when I approached. That told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had scared them, it wasn't gone yet. Then I heard it. A growl. Deep and rhythmic. Not steady like a dog's, but pulsing. Like it was breathing through clenched teeth. I stepped up to the fence and looked toward the tree line. That's when I saw them. 2 dogs. At least, I thought they were dogs at first. They were massive, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. One was jet black, the other a mottled gray with patches of fur missing from its haunches. They were tangled together, rolling in the snow, biting and snarling like wolves fighting over a carcass. Their movements were violent, too violent. They slammed into each other with enough force to send up sprays of snow. I could hear the impact from 50 yards away. I raised the shotgun. Didn't aim, just held it. I didn't want to fire unless I had to. The last thing I wanted was one of them turning on me. Then the black one stopped. It froze mid-motion, teeth sunk into the gray one's shoulder, and lifted its head. It looked at me, not like an animal, not like a dog that notices movement and turns. It looked straight at me, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight, and held that stare. The gray one stopped too. It twisted its head around, slowly, and locked eyes with me. They didn't move for what felt like a full minute. Then, slowly, they stood up. Not in the way dogs do when they stretch or rear up on their hind legs. They rose like people. Their backs straightened, their shoulders squared, their limbs adjusted, and suddenly their anatomy didn't look canine anymore. The legs were too long, the arms too jointed, the hands, yes hands, hung low with claws that curved like hooks. I stood there frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then they ran. Not toward me. Away. They turned and bolted into the woods, upright, arms pumping like a sprinter's, strides long and fluid. Their tails trailed behind them like streamers on fire. I watched them weave through the trees until they vanished, the last flicker of movement caught in a shaft of moonlight. The cows didn't move for a long time. Neither did I. Eventually, I lowered the shotgun, walked back to the house, and locked every door. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went out to check for tracks. I thought maybe I'd find some prints, something to prove I hadn't lost my mind. But the snow was strange. There were marks where the fighting had happened, great swaths of churned snow and blood where one of them had bitten the other. But the prints leading to and away from the scene were off. They started out looking canine. 4 pads. Claw marks. But halfway to the trees, they changed. The spacing widened. The depth increased. And then they were just gone. I followed them for about 30 yards before I hit a patch of untouched snow. Like they'd vanished into thin air. That's when I remembered the stories. When I was a kid, my grandfather used to tell us tales in Cree about the old ones. He'd sit by the stove, his voice low and steady, and talk about the things that walked between forms. He'd say, "Not every wolf is a wolf. Some wear the skin, some wear the face, but they ain't what they pretend to be." Back then, we'd laugh. Scary stories for cold nights. But that morning, as I stood at the edge of those woods, I didn't laugh. I didn't tell anyone for a while. I figured no one would believe me anyway. But a few days later, I ran into my cousin Nolan at the co-op. We were talking small talk, weather, hay prices, when he mentioned that something had gotten into his chickens. Said the coop was torn open, but nothing was eaten. Just blood everywhere. Feathers plastered to the walls. He said it didn't look like a fox. Said it looked like something had played with them. I didn't say a word. Weeks went by. I tried to forget about it. Tried to tell myself I'd seen 2 wolves fighting over territory. That maybe the cold and the moonlight had tricked my eyes. But one night in early February, I was out back stacking firewood. The wind had returned, and it was bitter, cutting through my coat like it had teeth. I was almost done when I heard it again. A growl. Low. Familiar. I turned. There, at the edge of the trees, just visible between the trunks, were 2 shapes. Tall. Upright. Watching. I didn't move. Neither did they. We stood like that for what felt like hours. The wind howled. The woodpile creaked. My breath came out in fast puffs. Then, slowly, they turned and melted into the trees. I dropped the last piece of wood, went inside, and bolted the door. I don't know what they were. I don't call them skinwalkers. That's not our word. That comes from the Dine, from Navajo country. We have our own stories. In Cree, our elders talk about the Wetiko, the hungering spirit. But that's not quite right either. This wasn't starvation. This was something else. Something territorial. Something old. I still live here. Still raise cattle. But I don't go out at night anymore. And when my cows get spooked, I wait until daylight before I check. I keep the shotgun close. Not because I think it'll help, but because it's better than nothing. And I remember what my grandfather said. They wear the skin. They wear the face. But they're not what they pretend to be. My dad's not the kind of man who makes things up. I've never heard him exaggerate a story, not even when he had every reason to make himself look good. He's a practical guy, grew up baling hay, fixing tractors, and driving through snowstorms at 16. The kind of person who'll tell you a ghost story just to laugh about how people believe in that kind of nonsense. So when he told me about what he saw that night, I knew he wasn't joking. He told me the story only once. I remember it exactly because of how out of character it was. I had asked him if he'd ever seen anything weird, like really weird. I was going through a phase where I was eating up every documentary, YouTube rabbit hole, and late-night radio show about the paranormal. Skinwalkers, cryptids, mysterious disappearances. All that stuff. I expected a chuckle or maybe a sarcastic, "Ask your mother." But instead, he got quiet. Really quiet. Then he said, "Yeah, once. I don't like talking about it." Those words changed how I looked at him. He told me it happened in the fall of 1982. Late October, just before the first snow dusted the ground. He was 20 then, still living at home in a small rural town called Larch Hollow, which nestled up against the edge of dense pine forest in northern Saskatchewan. His younger sister, my Aunt Anya, had come down from Toronto to visit their parents for a few days. She was in her early 20s, still figuring life out, and had driven up in her little green Volvo, an old boxy thing that rattled when you shut the doors. She left their house a little after 9 p.m., planning to head back to a friend's house. She was staying at 30 miles away in a place called Nellen Bay. It was a quiet, winding route through mostly forest and farmland. No traffic lights, no gas stations, no cell phones. Just the road, the dark, and the radio. According to Dad, she didn't make it far. About 6 or 7 miles outside of town, her car broke down. She was lucky enough that it happened in front of a farmhouse owned by some family friends. The Jordans, I think. They invited her in, let her use their phone, and Dad answered. No hesitation. He grabbed his keys, threw on a coat, and headed out in his rust-colored pickup to pick her up. He'd always been protective of her, even when they were kids. She'd broken her arm climbing a tree when she was 7, and he carried her 3 miles home on foot. That kind of bond doesn't fade. Anyway, he picked her up without issue. She left the Volvo in the Jordans' driveway with their permission, and they started the trip back to Larch Hollow. It should have been just a 30-minute drive, but what happened that night never left him. The road they were on, Old Timber Road, cuts through a thick stretch of forest. The kind of place where the trees grow so close together that even the moonlight struggles to get through. The kind of place where your headlights are the only things separating you from complete darkness. They were about 10 minutes away from home, chatting casually when it happened. It started with a sound, a scream, not like someone crying out in pain, not even like an animal in distress. He said it was something else entirely, something primal. So loud and raw that it drowned out the rumble of the engine and the country music playing low on the radio. Anya clapped her hands over her ears and shouted, "What the hell was that?" Dad said his blood went cold. He pulled the truck over to the side of the road, killed the engine. They sat in the cab, barely breathing, waiting to hear it again. But everything had gone still. Dead still. No bugs. No wind. Just the quiet hush of the forest pressing in around them. Then they saw it. At the edge of the headlights, something stepped out of the trees. At first, Dad thought it was a coyote, kind of lean and shaggy. But then it stood upright. Not like a dog rearing up on its hind legs, but like a person. A tall one. He said it had to be at least 7 feet tall. Long limbs. Narrow body. Its skin was covered in patchy, grayish fur, mangy and clumped like it hadn't been dry in weeks. Its face was stretched and wrong, too narrow, with eyes like polished stone and a mouth that seemed to hang open just a little too wide. But the thing that stuck with him most, the thing he couldn't get out of his head, was the tail. It was thick and long, almost too long for its body. And it was striped, black and white, like a candy cane, or a raccoon but grotesquely exaggerated. Each stripe was wide, maybe 6 inches, and the tail dragged slightly as it walked, curling at the tip like something that was alive on its own. It walked across the road in front of them, not hurried, not afraid. Just walked. And it looked at them, not by turning its head, just shifted its eyes. Dad said it was like being stared at by something that didn't see you as a person, just as something in its path. Then it vanished into the woods on the other side. Dad swears they didn't breathe until it was gone. He reached for the ignition, but before he could start the truck again, the scream came back. Only this time it was closer. A lot closer. He turned the key. The engine sputtered, then caught. He threw it into gear and floored it. Anya was crying quietly in the seat beside him, hands clenched into fists in her lap. Neither of them spoke. They just drove. He said he didn't dare look in the mirrors. He didn't want to see if it was following them. They made it home in 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When they pulled into the safety of the driveway, bathed in the warm glow of the porch light, they just sat there for a moment. Let the engine tick. Let their hearts slow down. Finally, Anya said, "Do you think it knew we were there?" Dad didn't answer. He didn't sleep that night. Stayed up watching the trees outside the living room window. Anya never brought it up again. She left the next day and had the Volvo towed by a local mechanic. Never explained why she didn't want to drive out there herself. Years later, when I asked him again, after I was older, after I'd tried to rationalize it, he just shook his head. "I know what I saw," he told me. "I don't know what it was, but it wasn't anything that should have been there. I've driven that road myself. Old timber. It's still there. Still winding. Still surrounded by trees that feel like they lean in too close." The year was 1996. I'd just finished high school, and an old friend, Jet, who I hadn't really hung out with in almost a decade, gave me a call. We caught up, talked some trash, and somehow decided to take a trip out to Louisiana. Just like that, we pooled together a whopping $160 between us, which back then felt like more than enough. And honestly, it was. We made it to Pecan Grove, a weird little satellite town outside Baton Rouge, and were instantly hit with a wave of culture shock. It was like stepping into a movie set filled with broken neon, the smell of boiled crawfish, and people who looked like they'd been extras in a lost David Lynch project. We didn't stay long. By sunset, we were already rolling back west, just looking for some cheap place to crash. We ended up stopping at this worn-out place called the Willows Rest Motel, just outside of a town called Magnolia Bend. It was a dump, make no mistake, but the air conditioning worked, and at that time of year, late May, that was all that mattered to me and Jet. We stayed up most of that night slouching on stiff motel chairs, playing poker with nickels, drinking warm vodka, and talking about nothing. Girls, college, and how neither of us really had a plan for our lives. At some point, I looked up and said, "Ever been to East Texas?" "No," Jet said. "Why?" I shrugged. "Let's go." So the next morning we packed up, hit the road, and aimed our dusty little Saturn toward a place called Delmore. We had a road atlas, no GPS, this was '96, and Delmore was just over the border. Close enough to be spontaneous, far enough to feel like a real escape. We passed through Shreveport to make a phone call to a friend of ours, someone who sort of knew where we were. Both our moms had apparently been calling all over creation trying to find us. We figured we were good for another day or two before we had to face the music back home. Now let me tell you something about Shreveport, or rather, what it was like in the summer of 1996. The whole place felt like a graveyard for old industry. It smelled like rust and oil and hot rubber. We saw people fishing in a canal with a factory pipe dumping God knows what just 100 feet away. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you'd need to bathe in bleach just for breathing the air. I don't mean to sound cruel, but it was a place that made you want to drive through without stopping. And so we did. We crossed into Texas and rolled through a town called Elviston, grabbed some pulled pork at a roadside shack, and started making our way toward Delmore. We found this lesser road, Route 47, that cut through the backwoods and would eventually take us northeast toward Texarkana. As we pulled onto Route 47, the sun was just beginning to disappear behind the trees. The road was narrow, winding, and completely unlit. I was driving. Jet leaned back in the passenger seat with his feet up on the dashboard, half asleep, half listening to whatever cassette was in the deck. Probably Tupac or maybe Tom Petty. I can't remember anymore. The road dipped and curved like a roller coaster, with trees pressing in on both sides. Every now and then, you'd see the reflection of a raccoon's eyes or something slinking through the brush, but otherwise it was just us, the car, and the sound of cicadas screaming into the night. About an hour in, I was getting sleepy. I rolled down the window, lit a cigarette, and tried to focus on the glow of the yellow road lines. That's when I saw it. I didn't look directly at it at first, just caught it in the corner of my eye, something running alongside the car. At first, I thought it was a deer. Then I realized it wasn't running like a deer. It was upright, long, swinging arms, covered in thick, dirty, reddish-brown fur that clung to its frame in wet-looking clumps. It was right behind my window, just behind the edge of the rear door. I looked at the speedometer. We were doing 45. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't move. I just stared straight ahead. But I could still see it. Muscles moved under that fur like something sculpted out of raw meat. There was no sound, just the wind and the faint hiss of tires on asphalt. Still, I could feel it out there, keeping pace, as if it had all the time in the world. I rolled up the window without a word. Jet sat up a little straighter. I could see the tension in his jaw. He'd seen it too. Neither of us said a thing. Then the arm came up, long, thick, and ending in a fist the size of a melon. Its fingers were matted and dark, and when it opened the hand, I saw claws. Black, curved, at least 2 inches long. Sharp. It wasn't a hand. It was a weapon. "Speed up," I said quietly. Jet nodded and pressed down on the gas. 50. 55. The thing started to fall behind a little, but not by much. I could still see it out of the corner of my eye. Its shoulders were higher than the top of the car now. It leaned forward as it ran, and that's when I made the mistake of looking. I shouldn't have. Its face was like something from a nightmare. Sunken black eyes with red pinpoints for pupils, wide nostrils that flared as it panted, and a mouth lined with jagged, yellow teeth. It flashed them in a snarl, then opened its mouth wide enough to show black gums, and a tongue that lolled like a piece of meat. My foot hit the gas. 60. 70. The thing finally started to fall back, its form swallowed by the darkness of the trees. Neither of us spoke until we rolled into Delmore an hour later. We didn't even stop. We just kept going, straight through Texarkana, and then we didn't stop until we hit our hometown. We didn't talk about it again for 11 years. I ran into Jet at a bar one night, and after a few drinks, I finally said, "You remember that thing on Route 47? He didn't even blink. "I never told anyone," he said. "I didn't think anyone would believe me. I didn't either. I still don't know what we saw. Some people say it was a Bigfoot. Others say it was a demon or some forest guardian. I don't care what name you give it. I just know that it ran beside our car at 45 miles per hour, and it wanted us to know it was there." I've told this story a few times now, once to some teens around a bonfire, once to a girl I was trying to impress while we parked out on a country road. But no matter who I tell, I always get the same look. that blend of disbelief and fear that says maybe, just maybe, they believe me. And if you don't, come find me. Sit on my porch. Share a beer. I'll tell you the story again. I'm 17 years old and live in a nowhere hollow town in western Washington called Red Fern Township. If you've never heard of it, that's no surprise. The only notable thing about Red Fern is that it sits on the edge of a forgotten forest preserve that even the locals avoid after dark. I've always been fascinated by the strange and unexplainable. I grew up watching shows like Mythic Files and Paranormal Recon. I used to think they were all full of crap, just actors and camera tricks. But I watched them anyway. Something about the idea that there could be more out there, things we weren't supposed to understand, hooked me. It made me feel small, but in a thrilling way. But over the past few years, something changed. It stopped being thrilling, because something started following me. I want to share what happened. Maybe someone out there has answers. Or maybe I just need to get it out so I don't carry it alone anymore. It started when I was around 6. I was living with my grandmother at the time. Her name was Marnie, and she was the only adult in my life who truly made me feel safe. We were always close. She taught me how to bake bread, how to sew crooked little patches onto my jeans, and how to listen when the wind in the trees started sounding like whispers. One night, I remember lying in bed next to her. She was asleep, deep asleep. I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old pipes groan and the house settle. Then I heard it. Elowen? It was her voice. Clear, loud, coming from the kitchen. Elowen, honey, come here. It wasn't like the way people describe hearing their name in a dream or mistaking a noise. It was unmistakably her voice. I even remember the slight rasp in her call, the same rasp she had when she'd been talking too much during the day. But here's the thing, I was looking right at her. She was sleeping inches away from me. Her chest was rising and falling in that heavy way that only comes with deep sleep. I didn't move. I just pulled the blanket up to my chin and stared at the open doorway. I didn't sleep that night. When I told her the next morning, she just smiled and said, "Some voices don't belong to the mouths they came from." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I still don't fully. The next time it happened, I was 13. My dad had taken me on a road trip to Utah to visit some of the Red Rock canyons. We stopped at a lookout over a gorge, miles of stone and shadow. While we were waiting in line for one of those glass bridges, I walked away from the crowd to a quieter spot near the edge. I shouted my name, just messing around, trying to hear an echo. I expected the usual bounce back. Elowen. Elowen. But what I got was something else. The echo came back twisted, warped, like it had been dragged through water. And it didn't sound like me. It sounded like Marnie. I remember freezing. I didn't say anything to Dad. Maybe I didn't want to admit I was scared. Maybe I didn't want to hear him laugh and tell me it was just acoustics. But I know what I heard. Still, I told myself it was just weird reverb. A fluke. But then came the Keybridge incident. I was 14. We'd rented a house for a week on the Keybridge Peninsula, this sleepy little coastal town in Washington. My best friend, Sela, came with us. She and I were inseparable. We did everything together, school projects, summer hikes, late-night horror movie marathons. She was the one person who understood that I never quite felt like I belonged in the world the way other people did. On the third day of the trip, my family went out for a boat tour, but Sela and I stayed behind. We weren't really into the whole whale-watching thing. Instead, we curled up on the couch and binged some cheesy sci-fi show on the homeowner's old Netflix account. Midway through the 5th episode, we decided to pause for snacks. I walked into the kitchen and started prepping bowls of popcorn and chips. I remember chatting with her the whole time, laughing about how bad the acting was, teasing her for crushing on one of the characters. I even turned around once and saw her standing there, scrolling on her phone. But when I turned back around to grab the bowls and suggested we head back, something felt off. Then I heard the bathroom door open. Sela walked out. The real Sela. She looked at me like I'd grown a second head when I gasped and nearly dropped the food. "What?" she asked. How'd you get into the bathroom without me seeing?" "I've been in there the whole time," she said slowly, brows drawing downward. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "I just talked to you. You were standing right there. You were on your phone." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, trying to lighten the mood, she said, "Maybe I've got a doppelganger. Maybe I'm gonna die." I didn't laugh. We ended up leaving the house and walking through the neighborhood until my mom got back. That night, neither of us could sleep. I asked her again the next day what she remembered, and she told me she hadn't heard me talking to anyone while she was in the bathroom. But she did remember feeling like someone was staring at her through the keyhole. That was when I stopped brushing this stuff off. We still talk about it sometimes. She remembers the way I looked, pale, panicked, like I'd seen a ghost. I guess I had. After that, things started happening more frequently. Always subtle. Always just enough to question myself, but not enough to prove anything. Then came the trip to Cradle Hollow. Cradle Hollow is a little cabin town near the base of Mount Quinault. We'd booked a cheap rental after our original plans fell through. The cabin was old, creaky, and raised off the ground by wooden stilts to keep it level on the sloped terrain. It was surrounded by woods, so dense they swallowed sound. We arrived late, nearly midnight. As we stepped out of the car, a voice called out from the darkness. "Hey there, neighbors." It came from somewhere uphill, a cabin we couldn't see. Just the glow of a porch light. My friend's stepdad shouted back a friendly, "Hey," and we all waved in the general direction. We heard it again the next morning, and the next night. Every time we stepped outside, the same voice, same words. "Hey there, neighbors." The voice was cheerful, but something about it felt copied, like it had learned the words but not the meaning. Then came the footsteps. Every night we heard them, circling the cabin, pausing just outside the windows. Sometimes I'd hear a scrape against the wood, like nails dragging across the grain. But the worst moment, what finally broke me, came during a midday hike through the woods with my siblings. We were doing a little photo shoot, messing around, taking silly pictures in the moss and ferns. Then I heard it. Elowen. It was so clear. A woman's voice. Familiar. Elowen. The voice was coming from deeper in the woods. My brother and sister heard it too. We all froze. My skin turned to ice. I grabbed their hands and pulled them back toward the cabin, half carrying my little brother down the slope. When we got back, I immediately asked my mom if she'd called me. She hadn't. She'd been in the bedroom with her husband the whole time, reading. My siblings were shaken. I could tell. They tried to act like it was nothing, but I could see the way they stuck close to me for the rest of the trip. That was the last straw. I started researching, really researching. Not just ghost shows. I started looking into mimicry creatures. Skinwalkers. Wendigos. Fey folklore. Anything that might explain what I was dealing with. I didn't find answers. Just more stories. People like me. People who heard voices that shouldn't have been there. People who saw loved ones where they shouldn't be. Whatever this thing is, it doesn't just follow me. It wears me down. It mimics what I love. It waits until I'm alone or vulnerable. Then it steps into someone else's skin and smiles at me with borrowed teeth. I'm not sure what it wants. Attention? Fear? An invitation? And I'm scared, deeply scared, that I'll slip up. That one day, I'll answer the wrong voice or follow the wrong figure into the trees. Because I've learned something. It's getting better at it. The voice is more convincing now. The timing is sharper. The thing that mimicked Sela? That was clumsy. The voice in the woods? That was refined. I've stopped trusting voices when I'm alone. I've stopped calling out to echoes. And I never, ever open a door unless I'm absolutely sure who's on the other side. I've told this story to a few people. Some believe me. Most don't. But if you've ever heard your name called by a voice that shouldn't know it, if you've ever seen someone you love in a place they couldn't be, you're not alone. My name is Dathan Meyer, and for 2 years I worked for the Gallatin County Historical Conservancy in northern Montana. Most of my work revolved around restoring and maintaining county-owned historical properties. Everything from frontier cabins to ornate Victorian manors. One of the perks of the job, and arguably the most surreal, was that the county allowed caretakers to live on-site at certain restoration projects. That's how I ended up living alone beside the Ridge Hill Estate, a gray brick mansion built in 1822, nestled deep within the pine-covered shoulders of the Bitterroot Mountains. The Ridge Hill Estate was a marvel, 3 stories, symmetrical wings, a widow's walk on the roof, and a sprawling 5-acre parcel that backed into federal forest land. About 20 feet from the main house was a modest caretaker's cottage, the structure I called home. The county had fenced in the entire estate with an 8-foot-high perimeter topped with barbed wire, a measure taken after some local teens broke into another property and spray-painted a mural of alien cows on the walls. The fence was industrial-grade steel, completely enclosed with only one access point, a heavy, padlocked gate at the front which I locked religiously every time I came and went. This all matters because what I saw one night should have been impossible. It was late October, and I had been at a secondary site in Missoula all day, helping install UV protection film on the windows of the old courthouse. By the time I made the 2-hour drive back to Ridge Hill, it was nearly midnight. The remote mountain roads were empty, and the chill in the air hinted at the first snow of the season. I reached the gate, unlocked it, drove in, and locked it securely behind me. Then I made the slow 100-yard drive down the gravel path toward the cottage. There were no streetlights, no ambient light at all, just the twin beams of my headlights cutting through the night. As I rounded the back of the estate's old carriage house, my headlights swung across the open lawn, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer, albeit a massive, mangy one. But as the beams of my car settled on the creature, every nerve in my body went tight. The thing was easily 6 feet tall at the shoulder, with long, spindly limbs and a coat of thick, matted hair that hung in uneven tufts. Its legs were too thin, too elongated, and it stood with a posture that was almost, but not quite, human. It reminded me of the pictures I'd once seen of maned wolves, though this thing was larger, taller, and utterly wrong in a way I can't quite articulate. The most disturbing part? It was inside the fence. There was no way something that big could have jumped the 8-foot steel barrier, let alone cleared the barbed wire without making a sound. I killed the engine, leaving only the low hum of cooling metal and my own shallow breath in the silence. I sat there, paralyzed, staring at the creature as it turned its head slowly toward me. For a fraction of a second, I thought its eyes reflected the light, but then I realized they glowed faintly on their own, a dull amber like dying coals. I reached for the door handle without thinking. I don't know what I intended to do, get a better look, maybe. But the moment I moved, the thing reacted. It didn't bolt on all fours like a dog or a deer. It stood. It rose to its full height, well over 7 feet tall, and took off, running on 2 legs. I watched it sprint toward the tree line at the edge of the property, its limbs flailing in an unnatural rhythm, and its hair catching the light like strands of seaweed. It vanished into the darkness between the trees without a sound. I sat there for what felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. My breath fogged the windshield. My heart refused to slow. When I finally managed to move, I threw open the glove compartment and grabbed the old 12-gauge shotgun I kept there, along with my industrial maglite. I scanned the perimeter, then walked the length of the fence, checking for where the thing might have entered or exited. Nothing. No bent bars. No disturbed dirt. No tracks. I found nothing. It was as if it had never been there. But it had. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the ratty couch in my living room, shotgun across my lap, flashlight on the coffee table, staring at the front door as if something might knock. Or worse, open it. Every creak of the cottage made my skin crawl. In the morning, I tried to find evidence. Footprints. Broken branches. Hair. Anything. But there was no trace. I even checked the security game cam mounted on one of the estate's light poles, only to find the SD card mysteriously corrupted. I started asking around town, quietly, cautiously. Locals in nearby Larkspur Hollow, a speck of a town with 1 diner and more cattle than people, had stories. A few mentioned the Ridge Hill Runner, a name they said belonged to a mountain legend that had been around since the 30s. Supposedly, it was some forest spirit or cryptid that showed itself only when the veil was thin, whatever that meant. One old man, Theo Bissell, swore to me over black coffee at the diner that he'd seen it once when he was 12. Said it had followed him for 3 miles through the woods, always just out of sight. He warned me not to go out at night unarmed. I didn't need convincing. Weeks passed. The incident settled into the back of my mind like a bad dream I couldn't quite forget. I didn't see the creature again, but I did notice strange things. The power in the cottage would flicker at odd times. One morning, I found the front gate unlocked even though I distinctly remembered securing it. And once, just before dawn, I heard something outside dragging its claws across the brick of the main house, long, deliberate scrapes that left faint marks in the mortar. Winter came and blanketed the estate in snow. The tracks of deer and rabbits were common, but one morning I spotted footprints I couldn't explain. They were large, bipedal, and led from the forest directly to the north wall of the Ridge Hill mansion. Then disappeared. No return trail. No melting. Just gone. The county eventually reassigned me to another property closer to Bozeman. When I left Ridge Hill, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt, as though I was abandoning something, someone, to whatever haunted those woods. I don't know what I saw that night. I've ruled out bear, moose, man, none of them fit. Whatever crossed the lawn of that old estate had no business being real. But it was.